Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Trump's destruction of the U.S. economy, and in particular the dollar, which has fallen 10% since Trump's return, with gold surging up almost 90% since Trump's second inauguration, as the world begins to worry that the person in charge of the United States is that incoherent fool who rambled on like a lunatic at Davos. Joining us is Dean Baker, senior economist and co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, a progressive economic think tank based in Washington, D.C. He's the author of Rigged: How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer, and he writes the popular economics blog Beat the Press, where he has an article we will discuss, Doing Well by Doing Good, Dump Your American Stocks. Then we'll look into the fight over state preemption of federal AI regulation as the White House AI and crypto czar, with the backing of Silicon Valley billionaires, puts together a $100 million super PAC to target Democratic candidates who are calling for stricter regulation of AI. Joining us is Brad Carson, co-founder and president of Americans for Responsible Innovation and the University of Tulsa's 21st president. In 2015, President Barack Obama appointed him acting Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness at the United States Department of Defense, and prior to that, he served as the Undersecretary of the U.S. Army, and from 2001 to 2005, Brad served 2 terms as a U.S. Congressman representing Oklahoma's 2nd District. He is now launching a Democratic super PAC to elect candidates, quote, committed to defending the public interest against those who aim to buy their way out of sensible AI regulation. Then finally, Sacha Linden Cohen speaks with David Faris, a professor of political science at Roosevelt University in Chicago and a regular contributor to Slate, The Week, and Newsweek. He's the author of Dissent and Revolution in a Digital Age, Social Media, Blogging, and Activism in Egypt, Time to Fight Dirty, How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority in American Politics, and most recently, The Kids Are All Left, How Young Voters Will Unite America. Sacha will discuss his latest article at The Nation, Democrats Need to Shut Down the Government to Defund ICE Terror. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now, Dean Baker, senior economist and co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and he writes the popular economics blog Beat the Press, where his latest articles include Doing Well by Doing Good, Dump Your American Stocks. Welcome to Background Briefing, Dean Baker.
Hey, and thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining us, Dean, and advising Americans to dump their American stocks may seem to some as being unpatriotic. Not that when it comes to money, people are necessarily patriotic. But why are you saying that?
Well, 2 things. I mean, the title's Doing Well by Doing Good. I think the story generally is a lot of U.S. assets, stocks in particular, will be going down. I've written before, I think we have a bubble because of AI that's, to take Greenspan's phrase, irrational exuberance. We've lived through this. It was 25 years ago. We saw a big market crash after it peaked in 2000, after a huge run-up, very similar to this. So I think it is going to crash. I think the dollar is also, it has been falling. I think it will fall more against other currencies, basically because investors around the world, both here and foreign investors, don't have confidence in the U.S. economy run by Donald Trump. So I think that's the reality. So people would be losing money keeping it in U.S. markets, particularly the U.S. stock market. But the other thing is, you look at Donald Trump, what does he care about? He doesn't care about you or me. He doesn't care about the uh, opinion polls. He just calls them fake polls. He doesn't care. He cares about the stock market, though. He cares about that. And the people around him care about that. So he's got all these incredibly rich people who couldn't give a damn about anything. Well, I guess some are white supremacists, so they want to get all dark-skinned people out of the country. But apart from that, they don't care about democracy. They don't care about the things most of us care about. They care about their money. So if we could amplify that, if we could make it happen sooner, that's a fantastic thing. So I'm asking people, do something for their own good. You have some money in a 401k or whatever, you save some money, get it out of the country, put it in somewhere else, it'll be safer. And that's what Donald Trump will pay attention to.
Well, that's already happening, right? People are dumping the dollar. The U.S. dollar has fallen to its lowest level in 4 years. Just yesterday, 1.3% against other currencies because of Trump's comments on Tuesday in Iowa, where he was asked about the weaker dollar. And he said, no, I think it's great. I think the value of the dollar, look at the business we're doing. The dollar's doing great. And of course, that is totally delusional. And now we're finding that people are moving into the Swiss franc. They're also moving into gold. Gold has jumped more than 90% since Trump's second inauguration, which is just a year ago. Now it's like at 5,200 an ounce. So Trump is a catastrophe for the dollar.
Well, that's right. I mean, Trump could say whatever he does say whatever he wants, obviously, but the reality is the reality, and his whatever he says isn't changing that. And again, people are putting money on the line, so it's not that they're listening to crazy radicals, whatever. They're thinking about their money. They're thinking about a secure place, and the guy's demented. It's clear he does not know what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's surrounded himself with sycophants, so even if they know better, they're scared to tell him. So is that where you want to keep your money? And I'm the last person to be a gold bug, and I'm certainly not encouraging anyone to go out and buy gold. But I mean, the price of gold nearly doubled over the last year. What does that tell you? I mean, this is incredible. People are convinced, and again, it's people with money. It's not I'm talking to my left-wing radical friends or anything. It's people with money. They're convinced this guy is nuts, and they don't want to trust their money with him.
Well, it looks as if his unbelievably incoherent, rambling, demented speech at Davos really panicked a lot of rich people, which is what Davos is all about, right? And it seems to me that they've got the message. And you contrast Trump's incredibly embarrassing speech at Davos with the Canadian prime ministers, and then you see it all. And of course, in response to that, Trump was so furious that Mark Carney got all the good reviews that he's now threatening 100% tariffs on Canada, and that would translate to a tax on the American people of $300 billion. So why don't the American people and the so-called economic advisors and the economic press, why do they keep referring to tariffs, on China or on Canada? They're taxes on the American people, for God's sake.
No, it is incredible, and it is. You're making a point about Davos. I know people. We all know people living in other countries, and I'm sure you've had this experience. We tell them how crazy Trump is, and they think we're exaggerating, we're making it up. And he goes to Davos, and the whole world, and particularly rich people, because that's what Davos is about. They see it in front of their face. Here he is. He's saying, I need Greenland. What do you need Greenland for? It's part of NATO. Well, you don't want to put bases there. We have an agreement with Denmark from 1951. You can put whatever bases you want. You want to mine there. They're actually open to mining. So it literally made no sense. And then he starts boasting. He's saying he won the 220 election. Who knows what's in his head, but everyone knows, sorry, guy, you lost it. There's nothing showing so they all see this guy's nuts. And then he boasts about how he didn't like the president, she's president or prime minister of Switzerland. He talked to her and he didn't like the way she talks, so he gave Switzerland a 39% tariff rather than, I don't know, whatever other tariff. I remember at the time many of us were going, "What's he have against Switzerland?" And now we find out it was just a phone call with their president or prime minister. He didn't like her, so I mean, he clearly is nuts. And again, he's shown up totally by Mark Carney, who gave, I wrote about, others have as well. It was very serious speech, and it really is very honest because he made the point, he didn't glorify the era of U.S. hegemony, which is certainly appropriate, but nonetheless, a better era of U.S. hegemony is better than U.S.-led chaos, which is what we have now. So, and then he retaliates as if to prove his point. I'm going to have a 100% tariff, which again is a tax. And again, this has been frustrating to me that you have all these reporters talk about tariff instead of just saying import tax, which I understand. I mean, we all know English language, but the point is a lot of people hear tariff and they think it's something other than an import tax. And again, I've talked to people, including not like uneducated people, and they're actually confused. You go, no, it's a tax we place on the stuff when it crosses the border. It's not, China. Trump talks about like he's going to put a big tariff and Canada's going to send us a check every month, or China. It's nuts. Again, I have no idea what's in Trump's head, but it's a tax we impose at the border. It's a tax on us. It's not a tax on China or Canada or anyone else.
So what do you think's going on now with the dollar having lost 10% since Trump came into office and hitting an all-time low today as a result of his ridiculous comments yesterday? It doesn't seem like a de-dollarization so much as dollar hedging or de-risking. How do you see it?
Well, just to be clear, it's not an all-time low. It has been much lower times past. I don't know, we'll go through the whole history of the dollar's ups and downs. So it's not like some catastrophic low. But I think there is a de-dollarization. It's not, people talk about this. It's not going to be all at once. It's not going to be that suddenly everyone's going to switch to the euro or the renminbi or whatever it might be. It's a process where you get more and more people saying, well, maybe the dollar isn't a safe haven. So instead of having 80% of my money, and it could either be someone in the US or it could be someone in Europe or Japan, wherever it might be, instead of 80% of my money in the US, maybe I only want 60%, maybe I only want 50%. And you have thousands of people, and obviously it matters much more what the people with big bucks do than what you or I do. I'm assuming you're not a hidden billionaire. And they make that decision, and that causes the dollar to fall. And I think we're seeing that process. I shouldn't say I think, I know we're seeing that process. How long that goes, how far that goes, that I don't know. But I think again, it's not 0-1. It's not that everyone's going to dump all their dollars tomorrow. But you see a lot of people deciding U.S. is a very risky place, or at least much more risky than we might have thought a year and a half ago, and they don't want so much of their wealth tied up here.
Well, the dollar accounts for around 57% of global foreign exchange reserves, as well as 90% of global foreign exchange transactions and about 54% of global trade, compared to the Chinese renminbi, which is only roughly about 2%. So it's not going away, the dollar.
Right. Again, so I've had any number of people ask me, "Oh, do you think people will stop using dollars?" Well, of course not. It's not going to go to zero. But the point is, those numbers that you mentioned, all those could fall 10%. Not tomorrow, but maybe they fall 10% over the next year. That's a really, really big deal. And again, I'm not saying that necessarily will happen, but that's certainly a very plausible story. Again, particularly given how crazy Trump is, and it might well fall more than that if we see the AI bubble burst. And I'll just qualify that for a second. I don't know when bubble burst. I was talking about the dot-com bubble back 96, 97, 98. For what's worth, I got my money in my 401k out of the market March of 98. I wish I could have said I did it in March of 2000. It went up a lot more between then. But, when that burst, I didn't know this. The housing bubble I was writing about since 2002 kept going till 2006 when it first started to deflate, and then much more rapidly the next year. So the timing on a bubble, I'll be the first to say, I don't know. It just looks pretty crazy where those prices are now, the price of the AI companies. But could that keep going? Sure. But anyhow, when it does burst, that's going to be a big hit to the dollar.
Well, do you think the Wall Street people know about how dysfunctional the White House is? Because it's so
Oh,
bad.
yeah, no.
I've talked to
what they
people.
say publicly and what they say privately are 100 degrees at odds. They're all scared to say anything critical of Trump. So you might have seen Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, made just the most mild criticisms of ICE, which I mean, I'm glad he did it, but it was just it was classic in the sense, here's this guy that, good buddies with Trump and, making ton money hand over fist, at least for now with his company, his AI company. And he's saying, as politely as could possibly be, this has gone too far. We should be more careful. But, again, I'm glad he did that. But it just speaks volumes how he has to, really just tiptoe around. He said how Trump's a strong leader and he could, he needs to lead the nation. So everyone is scared of him publicly. Privately, they know he's nuts. And that's the world we live in.
Well, I was going to say, some sources inside the White House itself have said that he is nuts, that he doesn't know what he's doing. He's completely mercurial. He's got a bunch of sycophants around him, as you say. Nobody can contradict his crazy orders. And he even contradicts his own orders, like on a daily basis. He tells them to do one thing, and then the next day he tells them to do the opposite. So they're completely confused. I mean, it is unbelievable. You would be better off with an orangutan running the United States than this guy.
Oh, probably, even the thing with Mark Carney, I mean, people pointed out ostensibly his reason for the 100% tariff. I mean, you all know it was because he was upset that Mark Carney showed him up. But ostensibly his reason was that Mark Carney had signed a trade deal with China. Well, a week before, literally a week before, it might have been 8 days, he was asked about Mark Carney going to China, sign a trade deal. And Trump said, I signed a trade deal with China. If he could sign a trade deal, good for him. And then a week later, he signs his trade deal and suddenly it's 100% tariff. I mean, this is nuts.
Well, I chose an orangutan because they have orange hair, but still. Just in the last couple of minutes then, Dean, let's go back to your article. What are you advising Americans to do with their money?
Well, I remember in this state's dot-com bubble, people were going, what are you going to do? Put it on your mattress. Well, there's actually a lot of things you can do. And the most obvious, if you have, I understand not everyone has money, but, if you have, 50,000 or something, you've been saving up a 401k, almost every place that has, where you put your money with a 401k, they're going to offer you an option for international stock funds. And, I'm going to do my commercial here, Vanguard, which I tout because it's a nonprofit. It's a co-op. Anyhow, they have very low fees. So what you want is someone with low fees, and Vanguard has very low fees, which is why I'm happy to pitch them. But they have any number of international funds. So you want to put your money where you don't want it under your mattress. I mean, you can put it in a money market mutual fund, which is fine. But if you want to protect yourself against the fall in the dollar, Vanguard has international funds, very low fees. And, again, you don't need Vanguard. I'm just holding them up as an example. It's not, you don't have to have $1 billion to invest overseas. You could do that with, pretty much any place that offers 401k accounts. And, I think that's an option. I'll just tell people, look at it, consider it.
Right. Well, also, just in closing, people around the world, particularly amongst our allies who are already being bruised by Trump's insults and his attacks on NATO and Europe, what's happening in Minneapolis must make America look like it's heading for civil war. People, the government killing American citizens. My God.
I just saw a scene there with some sort of armored vehicle, looked like a tank. I mean, it wasn't literally a tank, but looked like a tank. They're driving it down a street in Minnesota, and this guy stands in front of it. This is Tiananmen Square. I mean, it's exactly that, and you just go, and what is this over? I mean, you just step back and you go, what is it over? This is absolutely nuts. They go on, they want to deport the rapists and murderers. No one's stopping them from deporting rapists and murderers. They've invaded the city, Trump says, because of fraud. This is how you're investigating fraud. You're sending tanks down the street. This is absolute nonsense. And, someone was telling me, I'll bet the Nobel Peace Prize Committee really regrets not having given him that award.
Right. Well, Dean, I thank you for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
And again, I've been speaking with Dean Baker, who's a senior economist and co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, a progressive economic think tank in Washington, D.C. He's the author of Rigged, How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer, and he writes the popular economics blog Beat the Press, where his latest articles include Doing Well by Doing Good, Dump Your American Stocks. We're going to be station break and back looking into the fight over state preemption of federal AI regulations as the AI and crypto czar, with the backing of Silicon Valley billionaires, puts together a $100 million super PAC to target Democratic candidates calling for stricter regulation of AI.
Interest rates going up, seems like no value in the book. Meat prices up to stay, utilities are on their way, airlines are running late. Please, let the dollar circulate. Let it circulate.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Brad Carson, the co-founder and president of Americans for Responsible Innovation and the University of Tulsa's 21st president. In 2015, President Barack Obama appointed him acting Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness at the United States Department of Defense, and prior to that he served as the Undersecretary of the U.S. Army. And from 2001 to 2005, Brad Carson served 2 terms as the U.S. Congressman representing Oklahoma's 2nd District. Now he's launched a Democratic super PAC to elect candidates, quote, committed to defending the public interest against those who aim to buy their way out of sensible AI regulation. Welcome to Background Briefing, Brad Carson.
Great to be with you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you're, in effect, reacting to the fact that the AI industry from Silicon Valley has sort of gotten they have a PAC called Leading the Future, Super PAC, which was launched late August, and it's got $100 million in the bank, funded by Andreessen Horowitz, OpenAI president Greg Brockman, venture capitalist Ron Conway, and Joe Lonsdale, and the AI firm Perplexity. So you're up against big money, right? And you're trying to raise, what, 50 million? Is that right?
No, that's right.
So in terms of playing catch up, I guess you got the people of the United States on your side, according to polls. There's a lot of skepticism about AI.
No, that's right. I often tell people, would you rather have $100 million and 15% of public sentiment, or $50 million and 85% of the public? We're in the latter side, and I'm happy to be with the American public on this. So I feel very confident about our ability to advocate for reasonable guardrails on AI.
So why are you doing this, though? What concerns you about AI?
Well, I think there are many promising aspects of AI. Right? AI actually has the potential to revolutionize healthcare, education, material science. It's already making big impacts and improve productivity in many sectors as well. So AI has very many positive attributes to it. I think the danger is, though, it could be misused, it could be misaligned, it could have dramatic effects on inequality in the United States. It has a number of problems like that we should try to deal with and make sure that we benefit from AI and take all the great things without any of the negative parts.
Well, I recall some time back, Putin said that AI would, whoever captures and dominates AI will dominate the battlefield. And coming from him, given what he's doing in Ukraine, I would say that's quite alarming. So what, since you have a background at the Pentagon, what is concerning about AI in terms of the military? Because I can't imagine at the end of the day AI deciding whether or not to press the nuclear button.
I hope it doesn't press the nuclear button. And in fact, President Biden had an agreement with the Chinese that they would keep AI out of the nuclear command and control. But AI is poised to be a revolution in military affairs. You can think of a number of applications. First of all, increased cyber attacks as well as improved cyber defense. It's going to be supporting military commanders in decision support so they can more quickly make hopefully good decisions. It's going to lead to better intelligence as it fuses a wide amount of intelligence sources into a coherent operating picture for military leaders. It could even develop, maybe more speculatively, some kind of new weapon systems, right? Some kind of super weapon systems. Maybe more prosaically, over the next decade or 2 decades, you're going to see AI integrated into embodied machines, robots. And so you're going to see more robotic forms of warfare. So these are all things that have deep implications for our society, for the conduct of war, for the law of war, for humanitarian concerns, and we should all be closely following them.
So, given, I don't know whether you recall the movie, Brad, 2001, where the computer HAL sort of takes over, and is that the nightmare scenario, that AI is going to get so smart that it's going to outsmart its creators?
I think that is one of the many nightmares. Certainly, this danger of misalignment about AI that is so intelligent that it subordinates humans, that we can't really control it. We already know from work that actually OpenAI and Anthropic, as well as independent researchers, do, that many times it's power seeking, it can develop its own goals, that it will be deceitful, that it will try to self-exfiltrate. In other words, like try to find new spaces to roam where humans can't control it. These are things that are only going to become more dangerous over time. But there are other ways to have nightmares too. Imagine terrorists develop better nuclear, biological, chemical weapons capabilities as a result of it. Imagine widespread cyber attacks. Maybe, kind of over the long haul, imagine that democracy itself begins to fray as people rely on machines. Labor is less important. So citizens get to be disregarded by governments because they're no longer contributing to it. These are all kind of failure modes that we should be preparing for when it comes to AI.
So back to the Silicon Valley billionaire bros super PAC leading the future. They're already deploying. They got $100 million in the bank. They're already deploying it, right? They're trying to knock off a candidate in New York running for Congress, Boris. There's also going after the state senator Scott Wiener, a Democratic candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in San Francisco. So you have a partner in this, don't you? Former Representative Chris Stewart, a Republican from Utah. So you will help Democratic candidates and he will help Republican candidates against the Silicon Valley money?
That's exactly right. The overall effort we're doing is very bipartisan. Chris and I work on it together. He's a Republican. I'm a Democratic office holder. And so our goal is to support candidates in either party who are good on the AI issue. And I think right now, you're right. Leading the Future is active in the Alex Boris race in New York. Probably my own view of it is they've helped him more than hurt him, right? They've made his name. They've vilified him in a way that in New York only benefits him. So, my view is like I'm kind of watching them hurt themselves at the moment. But those guys, Alex and Scott, have both been people who've been really active in the AI safety scene and who I think have done great jobs.
So what do you make of the Secretary of Defense Hegseth's embrace of Elon Musk Grok? He said that Grok will live inside the Defense Department later this month. This is back on January the 13th. He announced that it will make all appropriate data from the military's IT systems available for AI exploitation.
Well, I think there's two questions here. Should the military be embracing AI? Yes, they should be. Now, Grok is the least reliable, most prone to so-called misalignment. We've seen that over the last few months with both the Mecha Hitler incident, as well as in just the last few weeks, where it would basically, put up quasi-pornographic picture of anyone who you asked it to fix. And so the rules around Grok are really the Wild West, even compared to OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, or the other leading AI labs. So that's an interesting choice, perhaps driven by politics. And I do think AI can be a powerful force for the good in the military, but one has to be very careful, right? We can't outsource all thinking to the AI. We need to make sure it has the right cybersecurity protocols where people can't see data that you're uploading into it. It can't be, read or exfiltrated to other countries even. So there's a lot of rules around it in sensitive environments like the military. AI itself can be beneficial. Grok is the hardest one to reckon with in terms of its alignment, and Elon doesn't take those things too seriously at the moment. So that's an interesting choice that Grok is the one that Secretary Hegseth has gone with.
So, as an educator, Brad, I'm concerned, and I imagine a lot of people are, in terms of the majority of Americans, 85%, are skeptical of AI and want it to be regulated. In terms of education, it already seems in many ways that the old, reading, writing, and arithmetic, that doesn't happen anymore. Kids learn to spell or don't learn to spell because they have spell check on their phones. They have division, subtraction, multiplication on their phones with calculators. And if you get AI to be ubiquitous on your phone, that would mean surely that you wouldn't have to think anymore. So it's bad enough that kids today don't necessarily know how to spell and do math, but is that the real problem here? That, apparently already educators are finding a lot of AI-driven exam results.
I think it's fair to say, whether you're an educator in K through 12 or the university system, any out of class work is going to be done by AI. And that's true whether it's in domains where you have well-specified problem structures like math and physics, where AI can do problem sets with perfection. Obviously, essays, it can turn out in a matter of seconds. And that's why, one of the most interesting kind of diagrams I saw all of last year was how the use of ChatGPT falls off precipitously when the school year ends. A student writing essays is kind of the best user case you have for LLMs today. So yes, it's going to revolutionize education. It already is. Education has to grapple with that fact. More in-class examinations, more oral examinations. And there is an aspect of thinking that AI brings forward, which is to say, to actually be able to interrogate the AI, to think critically about its outputs, to ask more questions. That is a great skill, one that's very human. I think we need to be teaching that as well. So not simply relying on the first output, but seeing how people can read things, ask tough questions of it, interrogate it, assimilate information. That's a very human project that is not going away anytime soon.
But do you accept the premise that we've already sort of lost to the iPhone, where you used to have reading and writing and arithmetic drummed into you in the old days, but nowadays you don't need it. You can have the little device doing your work for you. And
I think it is fair to say technology has definitely changed those kind of things. I mean, there has to be a balance. Most people think the calculator is a good thing, and we don't bemoan the fact that people don't use the abacus or slide rules or do long division by hand anymore. So the calculator is like something that enables us, which goes to, I think, the broader question, for your listeners, is like, this technology can be emancipatory. It can make us better at what we do. It can make us more human, more in touch with our real selves, or it can become a crutch, or it could even oppress us. And so, like the calculator, which enables us to do more things, most people see that as kind of an unalloyed good use of technology. We need to make sure LLMs go that direction rather than degrading democracy, causing AI psychosis, leading us to be too reliant on the technology. That's a choice our society will make. And social media doesn't say we'll make that choice well. I think that's the lesson over the last 20 years. But I still have hope that we can get AI right.
So given that there's already in the House GOP, leaders are considering to stop state preemption of AI, there's apparently language in the annual defense bill that would block state AI measures. We know, for example, that the state of Florida has said they're going to go ahead, even though clearly the governor is pretty friendly with the White House. But on this issue, he seems to be breaking. Give us, in the last few minutes, a picture of the state versus federal battle here and how the forces are arrayed on both sides.
Well, that has been the big battle on Capitol Hill over the last year, where members of the tech right, very close to the administration, Mark Andreessen, David Sachs, people like that, really want no regulation of AI at all. And they do see states, both blue and red, making aggressive efforts to try to rein the technology in. So they have wanted the federal government to preempt all of those state laws, essentially rendering them void. We have fought that at Americans for Responsible Innovation, part of a larger coalition, but we've really led that effort. And twice we've defeated it. So when they tried to put it into the defense bill that you mentioned, we actually got Republicans and Democrats to defeat that measure. But that is their ambition, is to try to keep states from acting on it, because states are more agile, they're closer to the voters, tech has less power in the states than they do on Capitol Hill. And so their ambition is to try to keep states from touching AI at all. And so I think this is a big thing for voters to be concerned about, is right now, if you care about AI, the action's happening in your state capital. And really, there are people from Silicon Valley in alliance with some members of the administration who are trying to ensure that states' kind of powers are stripped away.
But just in closing, David Sachs, the South African billionaire close to Musk and Thiel, he's the AI czar in the Trump White House. But he's also the crypto czar, isn't he? And a lot of people have even more alarm about crypto, whether or not, and frankly, it's never made any sense to me that you would spend real money on fake money.
He is the czar of both of those things. AI and crypto are the obsessions of Silicon Valley these days. And crypto, the battle is in some ways over because that 100 million they spent in the last campaign has made Washington, D.C. a very flexible place when it comes to crypto. And they've already got a couple of bills through Congress that kind of open up the crypto market for you. We're trying to avoid a repeat of that with AI. And AI is easier because there's a lot more organized opposition. Crypto is still niche. Most people don't understand it. AI, most people kind of get it. And there's a lot of human and social capital on the question of like, hey, this needs to work for us, not against us. So I hope the AI battles go differently than the crypto wars have gone.
Well, Brad Carson, I thank you so much for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Brad Carson, who's the co-founder and president of Americans for Responsible Innovation and the University of Tulsa's 21st president. In 2015, President Barack Obama appointed him acting Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness at the United States Department of Defense, and prior to that, he served as the Undersecretary of the U.S. Army. And from 2001 to 2005, Brad Carson served 2 terms as a U.S. Congressman representing Oklahoma's 2nd District, and now he's launching a Democratic super PAC to elect candidates, quote, committed to defending the public interest against those who aim to buy their way out of sensible AI regulation. We're going to take a restation break. We're back with Sasha Linden Cohen speaking with David Faris about his latest article at The Nation, Democrats Need to Shut Down the Government to Defund ICE Terror.
Thank you very much, oh Mr. Roboto, for doing what you got to, Mr. Only wants to. And thank you very much, oh Mr. Roboto, for helping me escape to where I needed to. Thank you, Mr. Thank you, thank you, Mr. I wanna thank you, Mr. Please, thank you, Mr.
Welcome back. I'm Sasha Linden Cohen, and you're listening to Background Briefing. Now we're turning to a question that is pretty top of mind for many Democrats as they're grappling with how to deal with ICE. Following the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, who were shot by ICE officials in Minneapolis, it's become clear that something needs to change, but there's a lot of variation among officials about what that change should look like. And with a January 30th budget deadline looming in Washington, Congress is going to have to decide whether they want to pass a spending bill that renews funding for ICE or if they're going to hold out, which could mean a government shutdown. So we are joined now by David Faris, who is a professor of political science at Roosevelt University, and his recent article in The Nation is Democrats Need to Shut Down the Government to Defund ICE Terror. Welcome back to Background Briefing, David.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sasha.
So first, I wanted to quickly ask, can you tell me about what's on the line for the January 30th budget deadline? What exactly is the Department of Homeland Security asking for, and what are Democrats doing in response?
Sure. The January 30th deadline is just an ordinary budget deadline for Congress to fund the various operations of the U.S. government, right? So the Department of Homeland Security is asking for billions of dollars in appropriations on top of the quite considerable amount of money that they were already allocated in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year, right? So the issue really, I think, is not about money. I think the issue is about Democrats wanting to extract some kind of concessions from the administration amidst what is like a sort of situation in Minneapolis that I think is really getting away from the administration in a way that's causing even many Republicans to publicly question the tactics that are being used by ICE and by the Border Patrol in their operations in Minneapolis.
So it's interesting you say that. I feel like there's a lot of Democrats who are pushing the needle further and further to the left on ICE following these pretty horrifying killings, as well as some Republicans. But I wanted to name a few that I found interesting in particular. Kirsten Gillibrand, a New York senator, said she would oppose the spending bill because ICE is, quote, out of control. Maybe less surprising came from Chris Murphy, a senator in Connecticut, who said we cannot fund ICE. A California representative said ICE in its current form cannot exist because what they're doing right now is killing people in the street. And the last one I'll mention is Representative Adriano Espaillat, who called for ICE to be, quote, dismantled. So I mention all of these because I'm curious about the landscape of how Democratic leadership is approaching this issue, and I'm hoping you can provide a little bit of context for where we stand right now ahead of the deadline. Your piece advocates for a government shutdown unless we cut funding to ICE or don't pass this DHS bill. How close is that to being a reality? Because it seems like a lot of Democrats are much further to the left than they even would have been 6 months ago on these issues, certainly having to do with what's been going down in Minneapolis. So how close is that to being a reality, this vision that you laid out in your piece?
I honestly think it's pretty close to being a reality, right? I mean, like we are witnessing a very rapidly changing public opinion environment, in which support for, what was very recently a pretty fringe position, which is abolish ICE, is upwards of 46, 47%, and some polls, even a majority of Americans now say that they support sort of like doing away with this agency altogether. Now, I don't think that that's what Democratic leadership will be holding out for here, nor do I think that that's especially realistic as an ask in this particular moment. Right? I think that's more of a long-term goal that the party needs to get behind and articulate a reasoning for, and reassure the public of what will be taking its place. Right? What the spectrum of opinion, I think, right now is about. So, what concrete changes are we asking for in exchange for agreeing to fund the budget, right, which they need at least 7 Democratic votes in the Senate in order to continue funding the U.S. government and to avoid another kind of crippling shutdown of the sort that we saw in the fall. And I think there's a variety of Democrats going out there and kind of floating different kinds of proposals, but I think that that they are going to coalesce around a handful of demands to try to rein in some of the worst abuses that you're seeing in the street, rather than holding out for abolition. And I honestly think that those concessions are much more important than any dollar figure that we currently are putting on, like, okay, so how much money do we want to take out of the ICE budget is to me much less important than getting some accountability for those agents in the street. Like, I think that Democrats are probably going to hold out for either a really significant partial withdrawal or a full withdrawal from the Twin Cities. I think that they're starting to think about asking for, not having these big sort of dragnet surges in blue cities across the country, right? Like this has struck a lot of people as not only excessive, but deeply unfair in the way that these cities are being chosen, and the way that there's this obvious political motivation behind it. We want the administration to walk back its claims of total immunity, which the vice president has made a number of times in public. In other words, like there's almost literally nothing these agents can do and face any kind of accountability within the U.S. government. I think they want them to stop wearing masks, right? Like we want to start respecting Fourth Amendment protections again. And so I haven't seen a really firm list of demands from the Democratic leadership in the Senate or the House as of this moment. But I think it's a really rapidly evolving situation, and one in which the tragic death of Alex Preddy in particular is sort of leading Democrats towards making this stand, right? Like, I'm not sure that there's going to be a moment where people are more outraged about the conduct of ICE and the conduct of Trump's administration policy than they are right now. And so it is, of course, horrific and tragic that it took the death of this innocent man, to bring us to this point. But I think Democrats rightly see a real opening here to rein in this agency. And I think that the top of mind for everybody needs to be like the people who live in Minneapolis need to be relieved of this siege, right? And we need to be reassured that this isn't just going to happen, and they're not just going to move this operation to Chicago or LA or New York or Philly or whatever, right? Like we want this whole dragnet style of immigration enforcement to be put to an end now, or the government will not open.
That is really interesting. I mean, I want to discuss a couple things that you mentioned there. First, the phrase abolish ICE, as you mentioned, it feels like has become much more mainstream than it used to be. I feel like in 2020, it had been coupled with defund the police a little bit, and that was sort of a political firestorm, certainly. And it's starting to look like a less and less radical stance for officials to be taking at this point. I wonder if abolishing ICE feels like an accurate phrase to convey what a lot of these officials want to do. I know you mentioned reforms, but almost from like a branding perspective, is there substantial effort to rebuild something from the ground up, or sort of do a total overhaul, or does that just feel like so far out of the realm of possibility that people aren't advocating for it? I guess in terms of messaging, I've read conflicting things about whether abolish ICE is sort of where the Democratic Party should be going in terms of what it's putting forward and the slogan that it's sort of advocating for. And I'm curious where you stand on that, or how sort of viable you think that is as a political talking point, abolition as opposed to reform.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like even just the word abolition, I think is very fraught, right? And while it is sort of gaining steam as a concept, right, the idea of abolishing ICE is like much more popular than it was even a month ago. I think Democrats in the back of their minds probably have their eye on sort of the shape of public opinion movement that we saw during the summer of 2020, right? Like in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the nationwide protest that broke out, you saw an enormous surge in support for criminal justice reform and like kind of reining in the police a little bit, and even for the idea of defunding the police. And what happened over the course of the summer of 2020 and into the fall is that surge in support for structural change diminished over time. Part of that is because I think the leadership didn't get behind it in a meaningful way. But part of it was that just like as the memory of that immediate outrage receded and like news coverage started to focus on the protests and whatever property damage ensued and the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff, right? Like the narrative of like we need to restructure and reform the police got swallowed up by the national political narrative where defund the police became the only thing that most people wanted to talk about and the phrase that Republicans most wanted to hang around the necks of Democrats, right? So I think that they want to avoid that kind of situation again. This is not me speaking. This is like kind of like
Sure.
in the minds of a Democrat, like an
Sure.
average Democratic official, right? Ruben Gallego, actually the senator from Arizona, said something really interesting, and he said, I think he said we need to tear it down and rebuild it, and that's not, that's not a phrase that fits on a bumper sticker necessarily, but I do think it's closer to the narrative that Democrats are likely to push moving forward after this immediate crisis is over.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess abolishing ICE, it does feel like a more pragmatic stance than defunding the police, but because of that association, strategically, it's sort of a tear it down and rebuild it situation, even though perhaps the missions are more or less the same.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are some differences, right? I mean, like when people think about defunding or abolishing the police, they think like, oh my God, like, who am I going to call? Like, is anybody going to pick up on 911? Like this kind of stuff, this practical stuff. And I think what people are seeing is that ICE doesn't play that same sort of role in the public's imagination, right? Like it is possible for like even people who are relatively disconnected from politics to think about a world in which ICE doesn't exist, right? What they want to be reassured is that like we're not going to abandon any kind of internal immigration enforcement whatsoever, right? So whatever the plan is, it needs to be sold to people in a way that reassures them that like Democrats are not like completely giving up on the idea of deporting anyone that's here in an undocumented fashion, right? Like I don't think that that's a political winner. Maybe it will be in a few years, right? But like there's a lot of narrative building and a lot of political work behind the scenes to ensure that that's a successful project. But I think that to me, the immediate crisis is just like, I have friends in Minneapolis, right? Like people with kids, and they're terrified. This is a horrible time to be living in the city of Minneapolis. I live in Chicago. We went through this a few months ago, not this bad. But I think the immediate goal here should be to stop this reign of terror, right? To get some really concrete assurances and accountability mechanisms so that the administration cannot deploy ICE as a kind of like lawless paramilitary to punish and terrorize cities that voted a different way in the 2024 presidential election. I think that's a situation that's completely untenable moving forward. And I actually think some Republicans are starting to see and understand that too.
Mm. I wonder if you think the concern is mainly how ICE is treating protesters and sort of occupying these cities. Like it is pretty depressing, but also kind of true that the fact that the two people who were murdered, or I mean, there were several people murdered, but the ones that have really taken hold of the mainstream media are white US citizens, and that's pretty jarring. You don't see that all the time. And so it makes sense that it sparked a lot of action. But I wonder, in terms of trying to get this reign of terror to end, how much of that is about how it's affecting protesters, how ICE is occupying these cities in a very visible way, and how much of these reforms that people are asking for, not wearing masks, are more so about respectability politics and making this agency less of a sort of overt, you know, overtly afflicting terror on people, and how much of it is about changing actual immigration policy or changing the way that we are approaching undocumented immigrants.
I think it's mostly the former, but with an opportunity to do the latter, right? Like, I think that there's a major element of respectability politics here, in the sense that I think a lot of the worst political crises happen when you purposely or inadvertently mess with the daily lives of like relatively non-political people, right? And so you have like just kind of non-political parents out there like guarding their kids' schools and like running patrols and signing up for the kind of activism that wouldn't even really have occurred to them to do a year ago. And the reason that they're willing to do that is that they see their sense of normalcy and safety and calm for themselves and for their kids and for their neighbors being really significantly disrupted in a way that they haven't been before. Even during Trump's first term, when there were sort of like high profile and pretty kind of like rancid episodes of enforcement happening, it wasn't in this like sustained, high profile, targeted way in which like the people of Minneapolis were being made to feel like, we're going to punish you because like Tim Walz is your governor and you have a sanctuary city policy and just like I just don't like you.
Mm,
So we're going to punish your city in a way that feels to people who are like otherwise relatively apolitical, like an attack on their lives and on their safety and on their kids, right? And I think that is really what has triggered this massive change in public opinion, right? Like you didn't see this kind of movement in public opinion in 2018 when ICE was carrying out its mission in ways that to me were still problematic in a lot of ways, but like didn't register with ordinary people because they didn't feel like they had to go like like run a military style patrol outside of their children's elementary school, which is what I'm doing. And so I think that to the extent that the Trump administration has stumbled into a situation where they have disrupted people's sense of normalcy and a well-functioning society, when what they voted for in 2024 was a return to normalcy in immigration policy, right? Or like a plea, like can you please make this crisis not visible, right? Like the surge in immigration during the Biden years, like whatever you want, we could have a long conversation about that, right? But like one practical effect was actually the disruption of like non-political voters' sense of like normalcy and calm in their own communities, right? And so Trump has taken that dynamic and he's flipped it on its head. He's been like, I'm the one disrupting your sense of calm and normalcy. Like, I'm going to kidnap your neighbors. I'm going to produce this endless stream of like seemingly chaotic news stories. And when white Americans start getting gunned down in the street, this is an unfortunate dynamic, but you talked about it, and I think it's very real. That punctures people's sense of the status quo and of normalcy in a way that like nothing else really will. And that's why I think Democrats, like who even a week ago I think would have been perfectly willing to just like fund the government if they get a few goodies out of it, are now seeing the writing on the wall that if they don't take a stand here and extract some kind of concessions from the Trump administration, their own voters are going to be so outraged at them that that will be the story, right?
mm.
I don't think they want that.
Yeah, once that reign of terror expands beyond the people who are being deported and into sort of civilian life, not that they're not civilians, but when it extends in this very, very present way, that dynamic sort of shifts. That makes sense. I'm curious, you mentioned some of the reforms that people are advocating for, but I wonder what you think the prevailing vision is, or who is leading that charge on what a new either version of ICE or a rebuilt version of ICE would look like.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it reminds me of the missed opportunity, I think, in the past year where there were some analysts and observers pushing Democrats to create a kind of a shadow government, which is a structure that exists in like the United Kingdom where the opposition party will appoint like fake ministers to be constantly putting out press releases like, okay, you see what these guys are doing, this is what we'd be doing differently. And the US doesn't have
Mm,
that, right? Like Democrats don't do that. We have congressional leaders who are mostly busy like whipping their caucus and doing other things and are not really meant to and are not, frankly, very talented at the PR aspect of opposition politics, right? And so there is no single Democrat that you can turn to and be like, okay, you're the guy with the plan. What's the plan? And that's why you have like this cacophony of voices when you were reading the statements from various Democrats a few minutes ago. That's just really typical of the way opposition politics works in this country. And so there is no single Democrat that can say, like, I'm going to set the agenda. You have people pushing different visions of what reform would look like from positions of like, a more radical, so let's abolish ICE altogether, to the like, we'll settle if they just stop wearing masks, right? And I think like we're going to meet somewhere in the middle in terms of the set of demands that get issued by our congressional leadership. I think this is a time where things are fluid and dynamic enough that, like, honestly, just people even calling the representatives and being like, this is what I want, could have a fairly significant impact in what the members of Congress relay to the leadership and then what the leadership asks for in these negotiations. And obviously people like Chris Murphy and Ruben Gallego are sort of high profile US senators with, with some aspirations for higher office. I think that they are just kind of naturally going to be the ones driving the narrative here. They're also they're also the kind of people that are just like willing to go on podcasts and willing to go on cable TV and are good at it, and can drive a media narrative for a few days at a time. And I think that ultimately where that's going to land is a short bullet pointed list of like, these are the things that will no longer be happening in America's streets. And if they can't extract that from Republicans, I think that we could be headed to a fairly long standoff and another shutdown. Because I don't think the Democrats can walk away here empty-handed and go back to their own voters and be like, yeah, I'm sorry. I know my constituents are getting like gunned down in the street by out of control, rampaging paramilitary forces, but there's nothing, I don't think that's going to fly this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm curious in closing, because we only have a minute, but what you think is going to happen in terms of bipartisan support. Do you foresee any high-profile figures in the GOP turning on this one?
I mean, the way that things generally shape up in an election year is that members of Congress who are facing difficult reelection battles are going to be the ones that are most likely to push their own leadership for change. So that would be somebody like Susan Collins in Maine, somebody whose political career is really on the line. She can read polls, right? Like she can see that the situation in Minneapolis is probably materially harming her own chances of getting reelected. Not just of Republicans holding the Senate, but of her own chances of getting reelected. And of course, she's elderly, right? Like in an ideal world, she wouldn't be running for office anymore. But she is. And, so like the candidates in a place like North Carolina, like battleground state Senate races, things like this, I think you're likely to see some of those figures kind of backpedaling a little bit from the Trump administration's maximalist positions, and particularly from, I think the most damaging aspect of the past week for them, for the GOP, is not even just necessarily the killing itself, but the reality is that there was like 15 videos of Alex Preddy's killing from like multiple different angles, all of which showed that he had been disarmed. He was no threat to anyone, and they just like shot him to death for no reason, right? And like the fact that Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller and all of these like really nefarious people are going on TV and being like, yeah, he was there to massacre, like. People just aren't that dumb. You know what I mean? And like that level of like just brazen lying and propagandizing, I think is playing very badly. And I'm sure their own internal polling is showing that even people who are generally supportive of Trump's immigration policies don't like it when civilians are gunned down in the street for protesting. They might even say things like, well, I should never have been there. But nevertheless, like they shouldn't have just, he shouldn't be dead for it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
well, thank you so much for joining us, David. I'm sure we'll see how this plays out in the next few days, but it's been great having you.
Thank you, Sasha. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And again, I've been speaking with David Faris. He is a professor of political science at Roosevelt University, and his recent article in The Nation is Democrats Need to Shut Down the Government to Defund ICE Terror.
And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.